everyone. See ya. Bonjour. Ni hao. Konnichiwa. My name is Shannon Kennedy, and I am the resident polyglot and language expert here at Drops. Every month I answer your language learning questions as a part of Ask the Polyglot, and so I am back here with a new round of questions. Let's get started. I want to know if there is a chance to learn 2 languages at the same time on one phone. Yes, it is possible to learn more than one language on the same device with a Drops Premium account. With Premium, you can save your learning progress in as many of our 40 plus languages as you like. Do you know Korean? If yes, is it difficult? For me, it's hard to remember all the letters. So, I do know a bit of Korean, and to be honest, it is one of the most challenging languages I've studied. The other most challenging language is Russian. So if you're struggling to remember the writing system, I highly recommend trying out Scripts, one of our companion apps. It's designed to specifically help you learn the Korean alphabet as well as several other writing systems. And we'll put a link for you somewhere. What do you do for not forgetting your active languages? Regular practice helps me remember my active languages. Remembering my inactive language is where the challenge lies. But the best way to retain what you're learning for an active language is regular daily practice. The more frequent your exposure to the content you're learning, the better you'll hang on to it. I opt for shorter study sessions, 2 or 3 per day if I can manage it, to reduce the amount of time I need to spend reviewing and to get more frequent exposure to the language that I'm learning. En combien de temps je saurai faire des phrases en japonais avec la version 5 minutes par jour? Je vais reprendre en anglais parce que comme ça plus de gens peuvent me comprendre. Alors, so, how quickly will you be able to make sentences in Japanese with the 5-minute per day version of Drops? Drops focuses on teaching you vocabulary, individual words. There are some phrases and travel talk, but it's primarily focused on single words. So while you can piece these words together to express your thoughts, you still need to learn some grammar. For Japanese, my favorite resources to do this, paired with Drops, were Genki, Asimil, and my tutor. If you work on scripting, where you outline the things that you want to say and look up how to say them, with the feedback from a tutor, you can start creating phrases in Japanese right away. Why can't I focus on one language and find almost all languages interesting? Because languages are awesome and insanely interesting. Plus, once you've caught the language learning bug, new languages are really hard to resist. Trust me, I've studied 14 of them. So, most language learners, however, struggle to focus on more than one language at a time. In fact, the other languages become distractions you go to when your main language gets tough. In other words, these other languages become forms of procrastination. To help me stay focused with my main language, I set aside 3-month periods I dedicate to a single language. I do this with the support of challenges like 90 Days with Drops and the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. By doing these 90-day challenges, I give my language focus a deadline. That way, I know I can try out other languages or switch my focus to something else. Knowing that I have this to look forward to helps me stay concentrated on just one language. And I know that after that 90 days, a new language or a new project is right around the corner. Do you think Korean is too hard of a language to learn for a 13-year-old? Definitely not. If you have the motivation to learn a language, that's all the reason you need to go after it. There is no such thing as being too young or too old to learn a language. There will be some resources that are off limits to you as a 13-year-old or that you'll need your parents' permission to use. For example, language exchange apps. But there are still plenty of materials that are available to you and safe to use. What are your tips for learning a dead language? I am so glad you asked this question. I actually wrote an article for Fluent in 3 Months on this, and we will link that for you. It's fluentin3months.com/dead-languages. But here's a quick summary of my advice. With a dead language, you need to be creative with the resources that you use. You may need to turn to more academic resources, such as university course books. You'll also want to find an expert. Often you can find a university professor or even students of these languages you can reach out to for advice on learning the language. You also may need to use old language learning practices. For example, the translation method, where you find writing in the dead language that you're learning, and then you translate them into your native language, and then you take your native language translation and then translate them back to the dead language that you're learning, and then compare the original to your translation and correct any mistakes that you've made. What is the best way to learn? I can never stay motivated, or my memory is awful. If you are struggling with motivation, the best way to learn is by incorporating a bit more fun into your routine. Here are a few of the ways that I do this. I love reading. So I reread some of my favorite books in other languages. You can often find translations on the author's website or even on Amazon. So I'm currently reading Game of Thrones in Russian and Hungarian, The Name of the Wind in Spanish, Eye of the World in Chinese, and The Assassin's Apprentice in French. I also enjoy video games. So I changed the language of the game that I'm playing to be in a language that I'm studying. There's nothing like not being able to proceed in the game because you don't understand the directions. You very quickly figure out what the translation is. If you use a platform like Steam, the games are available in tons of languages and they're listed on the description for the game. But even on systems like the PS4, you can download other audio and subtitle content for the games. A lot of the time you can do it in-game, but there's sometimes websites that publish these subtitles or audio for games, and then you can incorporate them. Sometimes I even have the subtitles for a game in a different language than the audio. So for example, I recently played Ni no Kuni with the audio in Japanese and the subtitles in French. Third thing that I do is I practice karate. So sometimes I find tutorial videos in other languages and practice along with them instead of doing them in my native English. To sum up, doing activities like this not only makes you more motivated to learn your language because you're having fun, but it also helps you remember what you're learning because it's tied to things that are important to you. Should I put aside language learning for school or divide equally? School first. It's important. Do not sacrifice your schoolwork for a language. Instead, use time you spend on other activities, time you spend playing games, going out, watching TV, etc. as your language learning time. Focus on your schoolwork first, and then with your free time and energy, you can then add in language learning. What's the best tip you have for learning a new language and remembering? Hi, I'm 14 and I have started learning Turkish. Any tips for memorizing and helping me? So these two questions are similar, and I will answer them together. My best tip for remembering is consistency. The more time you spend with your language and the more frequently you do it, the better you're going to remember. So my advice is to spend some time with your language each and every day, even if it's just 5 minutes. How many languages do you know, and are you learning more? I am currently working on my 14th language, Persian. You can learn more about this project in the link that we're going to share with you. I do not currently plan on learning anymore, but I have said that a few times now, and then I keep taking on new languages. So we'll see what happens in the future. The best way to improve your listening is by doing active listening, not passive listening. Active listening is when you engage with what you're listening to in some way. Passive listening is when you just have something on in the background, but you aren't really paying attention to it. Some active listening exercises you can do are take notes while listening, pause and rewind when you don't understand something, read along with a transcription while you listen, listen without a transcription and see how much you understand, shadow, where you try to repeat what's being said as closely to when it's said. There are more ways to engage in active listening, but getting started with some of these exercises will help you get started. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Ask the Polyglot. If you have questions about language learning that you would like answered, be sure to follow us on Instagram and keep an eye on our stories. I'll see you soon. Happy learning.